The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the participants and do not reflect the views or opinions of El Paso Community College or the University of Texas at El Paso.
By this point, it has been well documented that the coronavirus pandemic has disproportionately affected the Mexican American community. In California, for example, where Latinos, mostly Mexican Americans, make up approximately 39.3% of the total state population, Latinos account for 55.6% of the reported COVID-19 infections. In Texas, where Latinos, once again, mostly Mexican Americans, make up 39.7% of the total state population, Latinos account for 36.1% of confirmed cases and 46.5% of confirmed COVID-19 deaths, according to data recently provided by the state. But while all of this data does provide some level of perspective on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Mexican American community, it somehow fails to convey the tragic reality of the situation. It is easy, sometimes, to lose sight of the fact that behind all of these statistics, there are actual people who have been lost to this terrible pandemic, and that in the wake of every death, there are survivors who are left to mourn the dead. We'll be back in a moment to speak with our very own Ruby Montana about the losses and tragedy that she has recently endured in her own family. You are listening to Vanguard Elements.
You are listening to Vanguard Elements, an MASM podcast and El Paso's progressive Mexican American voice. Vanguard Elements is available on a range of platforms including Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, CastBox, Podcast Addict, Deezer, and Podchaser. Thank you for supporting independent community media.
Welcome back. My name is Aldo Mena, and I'm the founder and executive director of Mexican Americans in Solidarity with Mexico. I am joined today by our producer, technical director, and co-host, Hazael Anaya. And we are joined once again by our esteemed co-host, Professor Ruby Montana, a lecturer for the humanities program at the University of Texas at El Paso, and an instructor of philosophy and ethics at El Paso Community College. First of all, Ruby, I'd like to start off by offering my sincerest condolences for the tragic losses you have personally experienced. In the space of just a few months, you lost your uncle and your cousin to COVID-19, both of whom were educators, if I'm not mistaken. So tell us about your uncle and your cousin. Who were they?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say hi to you both and how nice it is to have a sense of normalcy. I think doing this podcast is, just a bit of kind of going back to normal routine. The last few months have been probably the most difficult in my entire life, to be quite frank, worse than going through a divorce or any breakup or any physical pain I've ever endured. I'll start with my cousin, Julie, first. So Julie passed away just about a month after my Uncle Freddie passed away. And she was very young. She was in her mid-50s. She had just retired from being a speech pathologist and an educator, a teacher at Clardy Fox for her entire life. And she had just retired this past summer. So it's goes without saying, she didn't get to enjoy her retirement, all the plans that she had. And she leaves behind a young son who's only 20 years old. Adult life is really just beginning. And obviously leaves behind all of my family members who just loved her and adored her. She was just really just a ball of sunshine, the kind of person that was always very optimistic and happy, and always very concerned about others. My mom has had some health issues for the past year, and she really was one of the family members that would consistently check up on my mom. Especially when my parents had COVID, she was, calling me and texting me like every other day. And I think one of the worst parts is that Julie had just registered herself and her mom for the vaccine, and they were both really excited about getting the vaccine. They registered in December. However, due to the initial long waits and, the tiers and the priorities, she didn't meet the 65 and up requirement. And so she didn't get it. And that's something that I think haunts all of my family, is wondering, how different all of this would be had we had access to the vaccine prior. But a month before that, on February 12th, I lost my uncle, Freddie Bias. And this is the first time I really speak publicly about it, other than at his memorial service. So I apologize in advance. I'm still really just reeling from the grief. It's been the most profound loss I've ever gone through. So my Uncle Freddie, where do I even start? He was more than an uncle. He was like a father. I didn't really have a close relationship with my father ever. And my uncle just sort of stepped in and provided that sense of affection and warmth. And just his presence. He supported me in everything I did. And he was an amazing trumpet player. He started playing the trumpet when he was in 6th grade. He had this fascination for jazz, especially. And so he started playing trumpet in 6th grade, and he went on to get a degree in music education. He knew that he wanted to teach music, and he did. When he graduated from college at the age of 23, he was actually the youngest person to ever be hired in El Paso for the position of band director, which is pretty cool. 23 is really young to be a band director. And so he was hired to be band director at Andres High School. He was there for a couple of years, and then he felt that his calling was in Segundo Barrio, which is really interesting and sort of rare. Most people do not want to teach in Segundo Barrio. And I know, Aldo, you retired from Bowie, so you probably have some thoughts on that as well. He felt that was really where he was needed, with low-income, underprivileged kids. And so he taught at both Guillen Middle School as the band director and at Bowie High School as the assistant band director for the total of 39 years.
Oh, wow.
And he could have retired years ago. He was just 60 years old when he passed. He could have retired a long time ago. And my family would pressure him, Freddie, retire, take a break, relax. But he absolutely did not want to hear it. He loved teaching. He loved his kids. It was just so glaringly evident that he truly loved what he did. So he didn't want to retire. He wasn't ready. And he performed throughout El Paso in a variety of different bands. His band, the Starliners, one of his many bands, the Starliners, they played at my graduation when I got my master's degree. They played at my wedding when I got married. He was there for all of the family parties, to play Las Mañanitas for Mother's Day or whoever's birthday it was, to play Happy Birthday. His trumpet was everything to him. And I think one of the really unique elements of my uncle's life was he actually sparked a friendship with the legendary Wynton Marsalis. Back in the 80s, Wynton Marsalis was coming through El Paso to perform with the symphony, and my uncle sort of camped out and thought, maybe I can meet him, and he did. They started talking, and Wynton, who I spoke to fairly recently after my uncle's passing, told me that it was more than a friendship, that it was like an instant kinship. He felt like they were old souls that had known each other for, other lifetimes. And so Wynton invited him, of course, to the show. They hung out, they played basketball. My Uncle Freddie took Wynton to my grandma's house, met my family. I was too young to remember, so that's okay. But apparently I was there. And they stayed friends throughout the years, which is really just phenomenal. My Uncle Freddie, who teaches in Segundo Barrio, had this friendship with Wynton Marsalis. And in the 90s, late 90s, Wynton Marsalis, who plays with this very special, unique, very expensive, one-of-a-kind trumpet, which is called a Monette. Wynton actually had one made, like the one that he plays for my Uncle Freddie, and sent it to him, which so is cool. just so amazing. Cool. And I mean, it's a beautiful horn. It's so unique looking. The mouthpiece is 24 karat gold. That was my uncle's just pride and joy. He loved that trumpet, and it was really cool because it was through him that I got to be like sort of a staple in the jazz scene. I would go to all the jazz gigs. So I'm really good friends with a lot of the greats here in town, and everyone knew, my uncle had that trumpet. And so it was really, really special. Obviously, of course, knowing, how it came to be given to him. He was just, it's not, there aren't very many people that I can say, this person was almost too pure for this world, but that was my uncle. He never had a negative word to say about anyone. When people were gossiping or making fun of someone, you could tell that it kind of made him uncomfortable. He would just make this little face, kind of like, like he didn't want to be a part of the drama or the negativity. He would always, for everyone's name in the family, he had like a different song. Like for me, it was Ruby Montana. Like every time he saw me, and for all my 30 cousins, he had little tunes. They were all different. He went to all my Halloween parties, and very often won the costume contest. He went all out for his costumes. God, I mean, really, I could probably talk about my Uncle Freddie for hours on end. But fast forward to this past December, and I went to see him to take him Christmas presents, and I had just missed him. He was doing his own Christmas present delivery, and so I just missed him. And he loved cookies. His thing was milk and cookies. Anybody who knows him knows just how much he loved the simplicity of just milk and cookies. So I took him some cookies, from a variety of cookies from Sprouts, and so I left the platter. I called him. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I missed you. Merry Christmas." And he was okay then. He was totally fine. And then literally just maybe about 3-4 days after Christmas, he started feeling ill. We're pretty sure he got it from someone who came into the house, who was not living with my uncle or my aunt, and who tested positive around that time. So it's kind of a no-brainer where it came from. Because my uncle was not careless. He wore his mask. He didn't go out. And it was just the mistake, if you will, of letting someone into the house who was very close to him. Just with my aunt, my cousin Julie, we know that she also got it from a caretaker for her mother, who tested positive, and so she brought it to the house. So yeah, my uncle started feeling sick. He was tested. It came back positive. My aunt also got it. My aunt started recovering fairly quickly, and my uncle started declining fairly quickly. And so on January 6th, he was feeling really, really bad. So my aunt took him to an urgent care, and they determined that he had pneumonia, right? The pneumonia that comes from COVID. And they said that it was pretty bad, that he needed to go to the hospital.